It's preparing. There we go.
Looks like
All right.
most everybody's, huh?
We're here, and I think we're live on YouTube. So hello everyone on YouTube who's watching us or who's going to watch us in the future. Um, we will begin with our blessing for Torah study, and then I will share our source sheets. And Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher
Kirishanu
anu
Mitzvah
sok divrei
Torah.
Torah. Hey. So let me share my screen. All right. Can everyone see this?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So I doubt we're gonna get through everything because as if you can see, it's 16 pages. There's no way we can get through 16 pages in an hour. But we're gonna do our best. So I titled this Laughter because we're gonna talk about laughter. Any guesses why before we jump in?
Yeah, a name start with.
Yeah,
A
exactly.
name. They're going to have a kid. Ishmael. I got them all, or is there more?
No, you're good. You're good. Yeah. So
Okay.
you're gonna have a kid and Sarah laughs, right? But
And
we're
then
gonna
Ishmael's another thing too. But he's
Ishmael's in it, yeah.
mocking, yeah.
That's true. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
We're not going to focus so much on that. We're going to focus on last week's Torah portion, Lech Lecha. There's a moment when Abraham and Sarah get their name change, right? No longer Avram, he'll be Abraham. No longer Sarai, she'll be Sarah. And in that moment, when Sarai becomes Sarah, God also tells Abraham that Sarah is going to become pregnant.
On the Zoom call.
Okay. We don't often focus on this aspect. We always focus, oh, when Sarah laughed. But Abraham laughed first, a chapter before in Parshat Lech Lecha. So we're going to go back a little bit. So this is chapter 17, verse 17 through 18. Okay, this is right after God tells Abraham, you and Sarah are going to have a son. So does someone want to read these three verses? I can't see everybody. So you can, anybody want to read? You can do Hebrew, English. You can try to translate into French. Nobody?
Okay,
Stan, thank you.
For me,
Yeah.
Abraham threw himself on his face and laughed as he said to himself, "Can a child be born to a man 100 years old, or can Sarah bear a child at 90?"
Okay.
And Abraham said to God, "Oh, that Ishmael might live by your favor." God said, "Nevertheless, Sarah, your wife, shall bear you a son, and you shall name him Isaac. And I will maintain my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his offspring to come."
Okay. So here we have, again, and towards the end of Lech Lecha, the end of chapter 17, right? Abraham falls onto his face, right? Vayitzchak, and he laughed. That's how we would normally translate that, right? We agree? Right? And he laughed. We're gonna see what happens. So we're gonna get into the commentators. Oh, I have a chat. 1 second. Let me see what the. Can I enlarge the font? Yes, I can. Whoa. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. Um, so um okay. So and he laughed, right? And he says to himself, right? I love this in the Hebrew, Vayomer Bilibo, and he said in his heart, or to himself, right? Can a child be born to a man 100 years old, or can Sarah bear a child at 90? So he's talking to himself, like, this is impossible, right? God's saying, I'm going to have a child, right? And then Abraham comes back. Well, I already have a son, right? Ishmael. Ishmael's just going to be my offspring, and he'll kind of follow in the footsteps. And God says, of all, right? But, or nevertheless, Sarah, your wife, will give birth for you a son, and you shall name him Yitzchak. Okay? Nothing really about why he's going to be called Yitzchak at this moment. Okay, but we know a whole chapter before Isaac is even going to be thought of from Sarah that Abraham knows he's going to have a son with Sarah and he's going to name him Isaac, right? So here's what we don't really know. We don't know if he goes and tells Sarah any of this, right? If we look at the actual text, doesn't seem like that happens in this moment. Okay. All right. Now we are going to jump to chapter 18, to our parsha. So this is literally just the next chapter. Okay. Verse 12. Someone want to read what Sarah's experience with this?
And Sarah laughed to herself, saying, now that I am withered, am I to have enjoyment with my husband so old? Then the Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh, saying, shall I in truth bear a child, old as I am?
Okay. So now I want us, before we jump into the commentators, I want us to kind of get into that mindset of what questions are Rashi and the, others going to ask. So comparing Sarah laughing and God's response in chapter 18 in our parsha with Abraham laughing, God's response in that moment. What do we notice in these two sections?
But they both laughed.
They both laughed, and it seems, right, the verb, right, is the same. Vatitzchak, and she laughed, and vayitzchak, and he laughed. Okay, George?
Well, I can't see the whole, but it was a Billy Bo and Bikarba
Yeah,
in his heart and near her.
and like near her, yeah,
It's
which is
not quite identical.
not identical, and yeah, okay. What else? What about God's response to Abraham versus God's response to Sarah?
In the second case, God asks Abraham why Sarah's laughing. In the
Mhm.
first verse, God asks Abraham why he's laughing. The question is, why does God ask Sarah why she's laughing?
Oh,
Yeah. But take a close look at, does God in the first part in chapter 17, does God ask why Abraham laughed? Linda?
Well, in verse 12, we have Sarah saying, how could we have a child? I mean, my husband is so old. And when God repeated that to Abraham, he said that Sarah asked how she could have a child because she's so
yeah,
old.
yeah, of course.
Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I guess he was trying to avoid Abraham's having his feelings hurt.
Yeah.
But he's okay, but God's okay hurting the feelings of Sarah.
Yeah.
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 George?
Yeah,
Right.
Shalom Bais,
Yeah, yeah.
you know.
Okay, let's go back to
Instead of saying this guy's too old, okay, it's me, it's not him,
yeah,
it's me,
yeah. Jack, you're muted.
What does verse 11 say in chapter 2 here? Because it's the language here is strange. Maybe it's translation, but
Yeah,
it says, and Sarah laughed to herself, saying, now that I'm withered, am I to
yeah,
have enjoyment with my husband so old?
yeah. So
She's
the
not
verse
talking about having a kid.
the verse right before that. So this is when um the messengers come to the tent and they give the news, right? This time next year, you're going to have a
Mhm.
child. And then the kind of comment on that verse after the interaction between the messengers, the angels, is, now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in years. Sarah had stopped having her periods.
Right.
And then verse 12 says, and Sarah laughed.
I just think it's interesting that the language here is, am I to have enjoyment with my husband so old?
Yeah.
No, it's not
That could be interpreted all sorts of ways.
Oh, for sure, for sure. Yeah. Um, maybe enjoyment's not the best
Yeah.
word to use, but it is, like, are we still going to be intimate with one another? Like, we're 90 and 100. Like, there's like, come on, I'd Stan.
Well, do you and other commentators, other modern commentators, feel that these numbers in the Torah like this are valid, the 100 and the 90 and previous numbers of hundreds of years old and whatever?
Yeah.
But they put these numbers in here
Yeah.
in the story,
Yeah.
old story.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I think it's appropriate to ask these questions we're asking, but I think we should also understand that they're more have to do with ideas than they have to do with ages.
Yeah. So it might not be specific ages, but we can know that we did in verse 11, right? Sarah has reached menopause. Like, she's no longer really going to have a child. Okay. And she's like, there's no way this is going to happen. Yeah. Beverly.
Why didn't God make Ishmael in charge of the covenant?
So they wanted, according to God, in chapter 17, right? Nevertheless, Sarah is going to have a son with you. Sarah is your wife. Hagar is your maid servant, essentially. And the lineage is going to go between you and Sarah, not you and Hagar. And so it was God's choice in this moment to go with a son yet born rather than Ishmael. Ishmael's still going to be, a leader with his own people. But Isaac is where the covenant's going to be passed on to.
I think we're also talking about miracles and the notion that we have a covenant because God intervened supernaturally to allow them to have children.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, but I want us to focus on, it's like these are all great comments, but we're going to really kind of focus on the response in chapter 17 versus the response in chapter 18, right? So both of them seem to laugh. God is not so upset with Abraham when Abraham laughs, right? He says, you know what? Laugh all you want, but you're going to have a son with Sarah. Next chapter, Sarah laughs. God talks to Abraham, right? Lama ze tzachaka Sarah. Why did Sarah laugh, right? So one, God is not telling Sarah this, but God is saying, I don't like the way Sarah laughed at me. Okay. But God didn't do that with Abraham in the first part. So we're going to take a look at some commentators on the difference between their laughter and the difference between God's responses.
Well, don't you expect women generally to have more faith in those days, that there was more of a questioning, rational piece to men's encounter with God? And because
Yeah.
I mean, I know that sounds sexist and I don't mean it in that way, but I think they had a different culture.
Perhaps, but we got to remember Abraham and Sarah are the first two people to really have this covenant and this relationship with Hashem. Right? They're building something new in this moment. So they really haven't had much experience with God outside of God telling Abraham, Lech Lecha, like go on this adventure, right? Take Lot, take Sarai, and then go to this land that you've never been to and see what happens. Right? So they're still building something new. We don't really have, the full covenant yet. Right? This also, what's interesting, right, in chapter 18, right, in our parasha, right before all of this happens, right, this is when Abraham is recovering from circumcising himself, right? And he's waiting out in the hot sun, and then he sees the messengers and he runs and he helps them. Right, he cooks for them and all of that. Okay.
I'm not understanding what Ishmael has to do with this whole thing.
So not a lot. In this moment, in chapter 17, Abraham is telling God, I already have a son, Ishmael. Choose him. Choose Ishmael to be the next, guy in charge of this religion. And God says, no, no, no. You're going to have a son with Sarah, and his name is going to be Isaac, whether you like that name or not. And he is going to have the covenant passed on to him. And that is the lineage. It's going to go through Isaac, not through Ishmael. Right? So it was it was God's choice, right? So we follow what God wanted in that moment. Right? And then we know later on in our parasha, right, which we read during the High Holy Days, that on Rosh Hashanah, that Sarah kicks out Hagar and Ishmael, right? And then we have that there's a beautiful moment between God and Hagar, that everything's kind of going to be okay. But that'll be for another time. Okay, this is Rashi. He is our, we always go to Rashi as our number one. If you open up a Mikrot Gedolot, the a text of all the different commentators, Rashi is always the first one you look at. He's right below the actual Torah text, right? And so here we're going to see what Rashi has to say. Anyone want to read? If not, I'm happy to. Steve, thank you. Steve?
Oh, yeah. When I read that the Holy One, blessed be He, was angry with Sarah,
Mm-hmm.
I look, to me, my conception of God is to be above emotion, to know
Yeah.
the past, to know the present, and to know the future.
Yeah.
So to give emotion to that kind of supreme being
Yeah.
doesn't make sense to me.
Mm.
Hmm.
I heard
Do the Talmudists deal with that issue, or is it ignored?
so I will say modern theologians deal with that concern of like, if God is all knowing and God knows what is going to happen, how can God show emotions in the Torah? How can God get angry at every little thing that the Israelites did on their way out of Egypt into the promised
Right.
land? God gets angry constantly, right?
Yes.
And I forgot who this was. I was listening to a rabbi. Oh, it was Rabbi Aaron Alexander. He's at Addis Israel in Washington, D.C. He gave a beautiful sermon on Parshat Noach. It's available on YouTube. It was all about when Phil Lesh of the Grateful Dead, when he passed away, and Aaron Alexander's a big Deadhead like myself. He gave this whole sermon on how could God get so angry? Like if God knew that he was going to have to flood the earth, right? How can God show emotion in that moment? I'm not going to do Aaron Alexander justice, but he said that God himself, or God's self, knew that God would be angry, that God was going to have to go through this. And God is showing the emotion also to kind of prove that it's okay to be emotional as a human being and to be angry and to make mistakes and all of that. But we can get into that at a later time, but I will send everyone, if you remind me at the end of class, I'll send you a YouTube link to his sermon. It's like 9 minutes long. It is so beautiful. I posted it on my Facebook the other week, so it was amazing. But he does a really great explanation of that. Okay, but Steve, since you had a question, I'm going to have you read this.
Sure. The Onkelos renders this as an expression of joy, and he rejoiced. But the one, the Titzchak, in the
Mhm.
case of Sarah, he renders as an expression of laughter. You learn that Abraham believed and rejoiced, but Sarah did not believe and ridiculed. And for this reason, the Holy One, blessed be He, was angry with Sarah, but not angry with Abraham.
Ouch!
So I'm pulling up the Onkelos. Onkelos was the first kind of major translation of the Torah text into Aramaic.
Right,
So let me,
right.
where is this verse? It's verse 12.
Yeah.
Way too far. Okay. So in Rashi picks up on Onkelos's translation, and he says, well, it's two different types of emotion. When it comes to Abraham, Abraham rejoiced. Abraham was filled with joy in that moment, according to the Aramaic translation. However, with Sarah, Onkelos keeps it as laughter. So for Rashi and for Onkelos and others, it's two different emotions. One is maybe kind of, we all will laugh based on different things. One, we could laugh out of joy, right? When something is just so amazing. Other times we can laugh out of discomfort. Okay. That's kind of what's going on, at least for me, with Abraham and with Sarah. Abraham's laughing, like, oh my God, I'm going to have a son. Like, this is great, perhaps ridiculous. Sarah kind of pushes back, like, she laughs. She's like almost mocking God, according to Onklos and Rashi. Like, I'm not going to have a son. Like, I'm so old. How are Abraham and I going to be intimate and have a child together, right? We're old. It's not going to happen, right? So, this, according to Rashi and Onkelos, this is why God was upset with Sarah and God was not upset with Abraham. Okay. Any thoughts on Rashi?
This fits with earlier, God had foretold that to Abraham that he was going to have descendants. Well,
Yeah.
I don't think Sarah really believed it the first time, which is why she wanted him to take Hagar and have a child by Hagar.
Yeah.
And so this is a continuation of the same lack of faith, as it were. His interpretation is a
Yeah.
continuation of the same lack of faith that
Hmm.
she showed earlier, because
Yeah.
she has a very pragmatic approach. Well, God says so. Well, maybe we've got to take responsibility, and you take Hagar.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to fix it, not waiting for God to fix it when God had already foretold to
Hmm.
Abraham
Yeah. I
that he
like
would
that.
have.
So keep that in mind, the idea of, Sarah not having faith versus Abraham. Some commentators will pick that up, that Abraham may have thought it was a little far-fetched to be able to have a child with Sarah, but didn't necessarily give up. And Sarah seems to say, it's not going to happen. Like, I have no faith. That's why we had Hagar and you have a child. Okay. Um, so let me see. We might skip the next one. It's a little long. Let me just, before I, um, hmm, let's see. I think we can come back to it if we want. Ramban can be a little wordy, so we're gonna um all right. So we'll come back to him if we have time. So now, okay, Abarbanel.
Right.
So now we're jumping 400 years after Rashi. Just about. Okay. So let's see what he has to say. So now he's going to present us with a question. Someone want to read?
I'll read.
Okay, Beverly.
Um, why did God rebuke Sarah for laughing and did not rebuke Abraham when he laughed? And the distinction that Rambam made between Sarah, no, that's not
Between a
Sarah.
schok and schok, so like laughter and laughter.
Between the two words for laughter
Mhm.
is laughable and nothingness,
Mhm.
because in truth they are but one and the same types of laughter, and the words they spoke are the same.
So
So
here he's
equating laughter with nothingness, like just a reaction.
yeah, so he's essentially like, we didn't read the Ramban, but we can kind of, Rashi kind of gets into it a bit, right? That it was a different type of laughter, right? One was out of joy, one was out of kind of almost mocking God. And here Abarbanel is saying they're both the same type of laughter, right? There was no difference between how Abraham laughed and how Sarah laughed, right? He says, because in truth, they are but one and the same. They're but the same types of laughter, right? It's the same verb in Hebrew. Onkelos changed it in the Aramaic. And the words they spoke are the same. Like, it's Abraham and Sarah had very similar emotions for Abarbanel. So he's kind of going against what Rashi and what Ramban would say, that it's two completely different types of laughter, and Abraham's laughter was okay, And Sarah's laughter was not okay. And that's why she deserves to get rebuked indirectly. And Abraham just gets kind of a little slap on the wrist, if anything at all, you know. Um, and then Abarbanel comes up with one, other type of question. And he says, why didn't God rebuke Sarah directly? Right? If we go back to the original verse and we picked up on this, right? Then the Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh, saying, shall I in truth bear a child, old as I am? But the verse right before that says, Sarah laughed to herself, saying, now that I am withered, and am I to have enjoyment with my husband so old? Right? God certainly heard Sarah laughing, right? But rather than God go and talk to Sarah, God instead talks to Abraham and says, why did Sarah laugh? Right? Now, one response that, maybe some of us would say if we're Abraham, and we know that Abraham is quite brave, in Vayera a little bit later, right? He gets God to say, if there's 50 people that are righteous, if there's 40 people on and on, don't destroy the city. Abraham could have spoken up and says, oh, if you want to know why Sarah laughed, why don't you ask Sarah? Right? But Abraham doesn't do that, right? And instead, so Abarbanel is saying God should have rebuked Sarah directly. There's no need to go to a third party and tell Abraham. Okay. So now let's go back down. So before we jump further, why do you think God chose to rebuke Sarah through Abraham rather than directly? Before we give Abarbanel's answer.
Maybe God was saying, asking Abraham, is there any other reason that Sarah might be laughing in terms of her relationship with you?
Yeah.
And just questioning him directly, do you know of a relationship issue that would make her laugh in addition to this?
Yeah. Interesting. I like that. Jack?
Does God ever talk to Sarah directly?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I don't think so.
I mean, it just seems to me like patriarchy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not wrong. Leora?
I wanted to say what Jack did, but also that Sarah was laughing in her heart. It wasn't something out loud. And maybe if God would have approached her, she would have been startled and very fearful.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. But I think it
And
was.
she did deny it at one point. She said, I wasn't laughing.
Yeah,
And
she
he
does.
said,
Yeah,
you
later
did
on.
laugh.
Yeah.
Remember?
Yeah.
yeah,
So
later on, right.
Yeah.
But she
Well,
didn't take
what's interesting is if we look
responsibility.
at the Hebrew, I think George picked this up, right? Abraham laughs in his heart, literally is what it says, and then Sarah laughs kind of close to her. So it could be kind of like a light chuckle that only she could hear, but Abraham did one of those laughs where we laugh internally, fully. No, I don't know. It's interesting because like every single word in the Torah really can be, dug up and we can discover something. So why didn't they use the same word, liba, instead?
Yeah.
All right, Rob, I thought I saw your hand earlier.
Oh, I think I would repeat what someone else said. Abraham was God's channel, not Sarah. And Abraham was used to hearing God. If God had tried to address Sarah when Sarah had never heard God before, she probably would, to use modern terminology, freak out over hearing God's voice when he'd never heard her before, when she'd never heard him before.
True. Yeah.
But didn't he speak to her directly when she said, yes, you did laugh? Because she did, or was that not direct? I don't know.
Let me see. No, so God talks to Abraham, right? Why did Sarah laugh, saying, shall I in truth bear a child old as I am? Uh, and then God continues, is anything too wondrous for God? I will return to you at the same season next year, and Sarah shall have a son. God exits stage right. Okay. Sarah lied, saying, I did not laugh, for she was frightened, came the reply. And then came a reply, you did laugh. But we don't know the reply, right? It just says, Vayomer lo ki tzachat. So we don't know, is that God saying it or is it Abraham? Who's the Vayomer in that moment?
I think it's Abraham.
Could be Abraham. It could be one of, the angels are still there. The messengers, it could be one of them. But it's so interesting that it doesn't say, Vayomer Hashem or something. It's just very anonymous. It's a male voice. That's all we can gain from Vayomer. It's like, no, you did laugh. That's fascinating. Yes, Beverly.
Well, I have a question that precedes all this.
Yeah.
Why was Abraham chosen? Because God certainly would have had his choice of who to lay this burden, this covenant on.
Yeah.
Maybe someone more suited for it with progeny and all that.
Yeah.
Is there any reason he picked Abraham, or did Abraham?
There's the midrash, the famous midrash of Abraham's father worked and owned an idol workshop, and Abraham was watching the workshop one day when his father went out of town, and then Abraham destroyed all of these idols, right? And then his father comes back, says, "Who did this?" And it was Abraham lies and says, "Oh, it was the big idol who destroyed all the other small idols." And his father says, they're just pieces of wood. They can't actually do anything. And Abraham says, exactly, right? They're not real gods. And so for the Midrash, and for, if we take that as what happened, God sees that Abraham wasn't going to be just a typical idol worshiper and had something deeper within him. But also, all of the characters that are chosen for these missions in our Torah and even in the prophets, they're not perfect, right? Right? God doesn't want a perfect person. Right? Even like Noah, who Noah was not, chosen as the leader of the Jewish people, right? But Noah was mentioned as perfect in his generation, right? But no one else really is. So Abraham is imperfect, and it shows that all of us can still walk in God's ways, and we don't have to be perfect angels. We're human beings. We make mistakes, and God's okay with that. Okay, let's see what Abarbanel has to say. So his question, right? Why did God not rebuke Sarah directly? Answer. Here we go. Anyone want to read? I can read. Oh, Rob, thank you.
There is no doubt that
תוציא את זה מ...
זה לא משנה, זה אני מדבר.
Okay, go for it.
I don't know what that was, but okay.
Someone was talking. You're good.
There is no doubt that Abraham told Sarah at that time what was said to him. Therefore, now, when Sarah heard the words of the angel, it was not appropriate for her to have laughed because she already heard it from Abraham's prophecy.
So here, Barbanel is coming in and he's kind of making a midrash on what happened in chapter 17. So he's saying, one chapter earlier, Abraham talked to God and God said, you're going to have a child and you're going to name him Isaac, right? And Abraham laughs and all of this. After that scene, there's missing pieces, right? And the Barbanel is saying, Abraham is a good husband. Abraham goes to Sarah after that moment and says, you'll never believe what God just told me. God said that we are going to have a kid and we're going to name him Isaac. Right? But we aren't privy to that conversation in the Torah. But Abarbanel is telling us, no, it happened. Sarah knew that she was going to have a kid. And when she hears the angel saying that she's going to have a kid, she should have already known that this is going to happen, right? Because Abraham already told her the prophecy. Yet Sarah still laughs.
But
Right?
any older woman, any woman
Yeah.
would be hysterical laughing at that and thinking, what a fool.
No, for sure, right? But Abarbanel is saying that she shouldn't have. That Abraham told her, like, this is God's will, and it's gonna happen, and we're gonna have a kid. I know. I laughed too, Sarah. It sounds ridiculous. We're old, right? We just want to retire together and, watch Netflix all day. Like, we're not gonna raise a child, And so they probably have a nice laugh about it. And then we enter into chapter 18, right? And then Sarah overhears this again, and Sarah's like, she can't help herself. She laughs again, right? But what Abarbanel is saying is that the reason God rebuked Sarah, even though it was indirectly, was because she should have, held her tongue, essentially. She already had a good laugh about it with Abraham, and she should have said, you know what, if this is really going to happen, then this is going to happen. Let's get to work, Abraham, right? There's no time to waste, you know? But instead she laughs, and she shouldn't have. Okay. He continues. Rob, you want to keep going?
Yes. And if it were the first time that she had heard it, it would not have been appropriate to rebuke her, just like Abraham was not rebuked.
So here, Abarbanel is saying, if Abraham never told her about this prophecy, then she could have laughed and it would have been appropriate. But because God rebuked Sarah for laughing, we must understand that Abraham had to have told Sarah. And that's why God rebuked her, because God didn't rebuke Abraham when he laughed, which means that God is okay with you laughing at something the first time, but you hear it the second time, you better believe that it's going to happen. Okay? But again, this is just Abarbanel. There's going to be other commentators that have a whole other view, which is fascinating. And hopefully, if we have time, we can see who's our favorite commentator. That was like always my favorite game in school. All right, here we go. So now the end of his comment. Keep going, Rob.
And however, since she had already heard it previously from Abraham in the name of God, her guilt was greater than Abraham's because it appeared as if she did not believe it the first time, not the second time as well.
So here he says, however, since she already heard it from Abraham that first time, because we know that because God rebuked her and not Abraham, it shows that Sarah didn't believe it the first time, which is understandable. They're saying it's the first time. You don't have to believe everything the first time. The second time she heard it, right, from the angel and the name of God, she should have believed it, right? She should have had faith. I think as Kathleen mentioned earlier, that Sarah should have had faith, especially the second time. The word of, from the mouth of God or from God's messengers, and Sarah still didn't believe. Right? What is the line? Doesn't Darth Vader say, "Find your lack of faith troubling," or something like that? And relax. So it's similar to that. Okay. So we don't have to go through all these questions, because we only have 20 minutes.
Rabbi,
Yes. Yeah, Leora.
it actually takes me back to forgot. I lost my thought. It comes back. I'll let you know.
Okay.
Sure.
No, you're good. All right, so now we're jumping another 200 plus years. I don't know, 200. I'm so bad at math. Uh-oh, everything flipped. How did that happen? I don't know. There we go. All right, so we were, right, 1460s, so yeah, 200 years. There we go. I'm not terrible at math. Okay, so Or HaChaim, he is one of my favorite commentators. Don't tell Rashi or anybody else that, but he is really, really great. He is, as my teacher in Israel said, Dr. Walter Hertzberg, one of the greatest minds of this generation, in my opinion. Or HaChaim is takes a psychological approach. He likes to get into the minds of the characters. So it's like him and there's Clea Carr. I took a whole class on those two guys. Really, really brilliant if you want to get into the minds of the characters and the emotions of what's happening. So highly recommend them. Or Hachaim, all in English on Sefaria. Okay, so here we go. Someone want to read? Stan.
God said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh, etc. The word Jay needs no explaining. Pardon me, the word
Zeh.
yeah, it needs explaining. Furthermore, why did he say
More, yeah.
To say? In fact, most of the verse is superfluous, as the Torah has to write was, why did she laugh? Going back, I want to mention that going back to why do we have an anthropomorphic God to begin with that
Yeah.
has all these emotions? You can't have a story without emotions.
That's
And
true.
all you're saying your commentators are really using emotion for everything that we learn.
Yeah.
So it's not a question of fact, it's not a history. It's a
Yeah.
question of emotion. Why is it a story? Why is it in the story?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. So Or Hachaim is coming in. He goes, if we look at our verse, and I'll just read it here in the Hebrew, right? Vayomer Hashem el Avraham, right? And God said to Abraham, Lama zeh tzachaka Sarah lemor ha'af umna eled ve'ani zakanti, right? So God says to Abraham, why, like literally, if I translate it, why this she laughed, Sarah, saying, shall I truthfully give birth? I am old. Okay. And Or Hachaim is saying, one, why is the word zet in there? Okay. Why is the word lemor there? And he goes, in fact, the majority of that verse doesn't need to actually be written there. You could literally just, you could say, Vayomer Hashem el Avraham, lama tzachaka Sarah.
Yeah.
And that could be the whole verse, right? It could be, God said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh? And we'll get the whole picture. We'll understand what's going on here. So Or Chaim is he's building this picture of why do we have these additional words?
Yeah.
Okay. But there are no additional words in Torah. Okay. Every word is there for a purpose. All right, here we go. Now his response. Stan, you want to keep going?
You want me to keep reading? Actually, God's very reaction. Better have somebody else.
Okay, who wants to take over? Rob.
Actually, God's very reaction includes a hint of why he took exception to Sarah's laughter, whereas he had not reacted at the time to Abraham's laughter. A close examination of the text will reveal that Abraham had reacted with joyful laughter at the time he received the message. Sarah, on the other hand, did not laugh joyfully until she had menstruated again, a clear sign that her youth had returned. She herself referred to her rejuvenation. This proves that she did not believe God's promise until after she experienced proof on her own body. It was this that God objected to.
Yeah.
What God said, I'll ask you to.
But Lama zed tzachaka Sarah.
Thank you. He emphasized to Abraham that this laughter of Sarah was objectionable. By her comment after the event that she now realized she would indeed bear a child, that now she was convinced she would bear a child despite her husband's age. Sarah showed up at that time. Showed that until that time, she had not believed God capable of arranging this.
Okay. So what is Or Hachaim's reason for the word zeh?
Yeah, this.
Right?
Okay.
Grammatically, we don't need the word zeh, but it's there. So what is he droshing on the word zeh for?
Well,
What does it mean?
oh,
So zeh literally means this, but
Okay.
Or Hachaim's question was, why do we have the word zeh? It doesn't seem to make sense. George.
Okay, I don't know if menstrual cycle is male or female, but that this is a male,
Yeah.
referring to something.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the implication is, okay, this is referring to something that, might be possible. Otherwise, it wouldn't be.
Yeah.
So, so there's something is this. And again, I'm guessing it's, rejuvenation, menstrual cycle, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, I think it's even simpler for Or HaChaim. The
Okay,
Zeh for Or HaChaim is
okay.
talking about the laughter.
Oh, okay.
This
Yeah, that's
laughter,
that's male
Zeh
then. Yeah,
Chachaka,
yeah, that's a
this
male.
yeah, this
Uh,
laughter is
yeah,
problematic,
yeah.
whereas Abraham's laughter in chapter 17 was not problematic, right? No word Zeh there. So God is telling Abraham, right? Remember, you laughed not that long ago, and I was okay with it. And so God is telling Abraham again here that this laughter, I'm not okay with this laughter. Some laughter, joyful laughter, that's okay, right? But this laughter that Sarah did, ooh, it made me uncomfortable, right? Which is awesome to think that God, God gets uncomfortable, right? I don't like this kind of laughter. She's laughing at me, right? Abraham was kind of laughing maybe with God, joyfully. Sarah's laughing at God, right? God doesn't like that. Don't laugh at me, right? Um, and it was only until Sarah kind of had her youth once again that she was able to laugh with joy. But up until this moment, her laughter was kind of mocking, or a lack of faith, right? Zeh is not the kind of laughter that we need to experience, right? We never want to laugh at someone, but we can laugh with somebody. So for Or HaChaim, that is why Sarah was rebuked and Abraham was not. It's all about the type of laughter. So Or HaChaim is in a similar boat as Rashi, right? That it was two types of laughter, right? But I think what Rashi didn't do and what Or HaChaim did, and maybe this is the 600 years of research or something, is that Or HaChaim says it's in the word zeh. That's the key word. Where Rashi is, the key word is the translation from Hebrew into Aramaic from Onkelos. But Or HaChaim is like, no, it's literally right in the sentence. Lama zeh. The zeh doesn't need to be there. So the zeh is pointing to the type of laughter that's inappropriate. Okay. Um, so we're gonna skip that. Oh my gosh, we only have 10 minutes. This is oy. Okay, now we're going back in time. So everyone get in your DeLorean, get it to 88 miles an hour, and we'll go back a couple hundred years. All right. Um, here we go. Someone want to read?
I'll read.
Okay, thank you.
In my opinion, there's no need to force the point. Let the verses be interpreted according to their plain meaning, and you will that in this way there is also found in him, Abraham, a bit of transgression and a lack of belief.
So here, the Akedat Yitzchak is saying that all of this stuff about its different types of laughter, and there's a drush about the zeh, even though he doesn't know about the drush about the zeh, because Or Chaim writes in the future, but it could have existed before that. He's saying, let's just read it at the pshat level. Abraham laughed and Sarah laughed. That's all that happened, right? It wasn't a specific type of laughter. It was, they both laughed when God said that you're gonna have a child.
Oh, no.
And
Okay.
that's all there is to it. That's the simple, the plain meaning of the text. So keep going, Nancy.
God ought to have rebuked him, Abraham, to his face, except for the fact that that very day was the day of good tidings, not an appropriate day of rebuke, because the great mitzvah of Milah,
Keep going.
circumcision, was given on that day.
Okay. So here, Akedat Yitzchak says, listen, Abraham laughed at God. That's not cool. God should have rebuked Abraham just like God rebuked Sarah, right? God's not playing favorites, even if it seems like God is in this moment. So there's got to be a reason that God did not rebuke Abraham, but chose to rebuke Sarah instead. Yeah, Elon?
First, he did rebuke Abraham. He told him, your son will be Yitzhak because you laughed.
Yeah.
The clear rebuke saying, and it's not because Sarah laughed.
Yeah.
It's clear rebuke because it was before. You are guilty for laughing at me.
Yeah.
And that's why your son will be called laugh to remind you that you laugh.
Yeah. And it's fascinating,
From
right?
the whole
Like,
story, we see a problem. Why God has to send three angels, and one of them is supposed to talk to Sarah,
yeah.
especially. If Abraham told her, so what is it? He told her, everything is fine. Why did God have to send those angels?
Yeah.
The fact that he sent is a proof that Abraham did not tell her.
Yeah.
When she laughed,
Yeah.
we don't know why, maybe happiness,
Yeah.
she saw that Abraham is not laughing.
Yeah.
So at that moment, she knew he didn't tell her.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the angel are telling him that he laughed because they want to tell him. That's the second rebuke to Abraham, telling him, she heard you and she laughed, and then they lie about who is old.
Yeah.
Now we know that they are lying.
Yeah.
Maybe she didn't laugh, maybe she laughed, we don't know because they are lying already.
Yeah.
So they made sure that Abraham knows that she knows, and she knows that he knows that now everybody is knowing,
Yeah.
and he must go to her. And the reaction of Abraham was to take her to Gerar and declare her as sister.
Yeah.
In my opinion, it is like saying, you said that you can do it. You said it will be a miracle. Go ahead and do it. I don't have to help you.
Yeah.
I'll take her to Gerar and I'll declare as my sister. Now I cannot come to her.
Yeah.
And let's go, God do it. And
Yeah.
God told him, if you don't do it,
Yeah.
Abimelech will do it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. It's also fascinating the idea of like, Isaac's name is Yitzchak, right? Which is like he laughed or he will laugh, right? It's not Titzchak, which is like she laughed, like or she will laugh. So it's like, he's named after when Abraham laughed rather than Sarah. All right, Judy, I see your hand is up.
Um, through all of this, I just don't get why God is so thin-skinned and so sensitive about all of this.
Yeah.
I mean, here's a woman who hasn't had a kid ever and is being told at 90, whatever, that she's going to have a baby. And I certainly can understand why she was skeptical about it and afraid and everything. And I just don't get why God is so judgmental and skinned about it all.
I will say that we as human beings are all made in the image of God, and some human beings can act that way too. So it's only makes sense that maybe that comes from God, the way we can react to certain things. Okay, really quick. So what is Akedat Yitzchak? What is his explanation? So why, according to him, was Abraham not rebuked in that moment? Even though, Elon, I love your interpretation. I think that's a really beautiful kind of drash that Abraham was rebuked. But according to Akedat Yitzchak, he wasn't because why did God not want to, punish Abraham in that moment? What does it say?
The day that he had the Brit Milah, that's why ruin his day.
So you didn't want to ruin his day, right? Like this is a huge mitzvah, right? And it's also, we'll say, a painful mitzvah, and he did it to himself, and he was old, okay? And so God's like, listen, you're about to be in a lot of pain, Abraham, okay? You don't know what I'm about to ask you, but it's going to be an adventure. And I don't want to make you feel any worse, emotionally in this moment. So for Akedah, Yitzchak says, you know what? Because there was this great positive mitzvah of Brit Milah, then God did not rebuke Abraham in that moment. But what's fascinating, right, is even like later on when God rebukes Sarah, God does it through Abraham. So I don't know if it might be, I don't want to spoil it. So let's see if it's right here.
Does it have anything to do with her being a woman?
You know,
Like, a less, not less class, but second.
I mean, we have to put ourselves in the time period of both when the Torah was written and when these characters were walking the earth, as well as the time that our commentators were living, right? Medieval Europe, right? Very different world. And so I'm sure it has a lot to do with the fact that Sarah was a woman, and Abraham was a man, and there was a different sort of system and class for the two of them. All right, we got 3 minutes. Let's get through the end of this. And who wants to read? Anybody? Rob, thank you.
And so the matter is similar here, for God did not want to sadden him and frighten him with the words of rebuke on the day of his wedding, so to speak. So God waited for the third day of the circumcision because it was revealed and known before him that Sarah would react similarly, and it would be sufficient for him to rebuke him then. And by rebuking her, Sarah, via Abraham, and Abraham would then understand that he too was being rebuked.
Okay, so he's saying that, right, God did not want to upset Abraham on the day of the covenant, on the day of the Milah in that moment. So God's like, you know what? I care about Abraham, right? He's a sweet guy. He's about to do something pretty big for me, and I don't want to cause him any more stress. So he said, let me give it a few days, right? And Akedah Yitzchak says, God is all-knowing, right? God knows how Sarah would react. God knew that Sarah was going to laugh, right? If God is all-knowing. So God says, you know what? I'm going to wait 3 days after the circumcision, and then Sarah's going to laugh because I've seen it, right? I've gotten in my God DeLorean and seen her laughing. And then, I know, sorry. And then God says, I'm going to be able to rebuke Abraham and Sarah after Sarah laughs. And that is, according to Akedah Yitzchak, why God spoke to Abraham, asking, why did Sarah laugh, rather than go directly to Sarah. So somewhere in Abraham's mind, he would realize, I am also being rebuked because I also laughed. So he's saying that both of them got punished. I don't know, punished, rebuked is yeah. It just took a little bit more time because God didn't want to cause any more stress upon Abraham in that moment.
Wait a second.
Yeah. Okay, here we go. And then last little bits.
And you shall call his name Yitzchak as a remembrance that you laughed about it, considering an incredulous manner in your eyes. And that was the beginning of the rebuke.
Here, this is what Elon had brought up, right? And you shall call his name Yitzchak, to remind you that that is what you did, Abraham, right? Abraham, what's the verse, right? Vayipol Avraham al panav vayitzchak, right? He fell upon his face and he laughed. Vayitzchak. And so God is saying, like, you're going to call him Yitzchak because you, Abraham, are being rebuked for what you did to me. You also laughed at me. And so now you're going to have to always remember that every time you yell at your son to clean his room, you're going to be reminded of the fact that you laughed at me. Right? Yitzchak, pick up your toys. oh my gosh, I can't believe I laughed at God that one time. And so it's a constant reminder, which then, we don't have time for this, but we can get into all sorts of, psychology about, oh, maybe it's interesting. Abraham is constantly reminded of this, laughing at God. And now all of a sudden, and then later on in our Torah portion, Abraham's going to go sacrifice his son. Maybe we can start to wonder, get into Abraham's mind, why was he in such a hurry to sacrifice Isaac? Right? But I don't want to, that's a whole nother session that we could get into the mind of why did Abraham rush to do something to sacrifice Yitzchak, if we take this commentator. And then, and then they never talk again at the end of that, right? God never talks to Abraham after the Akedah, and Isaac never talks to Abraham, and Sarah dies. It's really powerful, the end of the parsha. Well, in there, I'll stop my sharing, if I can figure out how. And then